Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. We've just opened the doors, and so folks are, Zoom is letting folks in, and it's going to be probably a minute. But while we are waiting for that minute, if you are inclined, please use the chat function to add your name and your institution so that we can see where folks are coming in from. We've got just over 400 folks in now, and we've got more than 1,000 registered for today's webinar. And so I expect that there will be a handful more streaming in as registrations or as folks are getting access to the Zoom room. My name is Nick Mathern, and I am the Vice President for K-12 Partnerships for Achieving the Dream. And I am very happy to have all of you here with us today. I am just getting our slide deck up, and we're going to go ahead and share that here in a moment. Pardon me, sorry about the. So we will begin shortly. It looks like we've got a lot of folks in the room. While we are waiting and getting folks in the room, I just want to point out that we do have obviously a live chat function for today, and you're welcome to use that for discussion or questions during the presentations and during our panel discussion. We also have a Q&A function, and so if you have got questions that you would like to have addressed, we may have an opportunity to address questions at the very end of our panel, so please use that. We've got staff who will be monitoring the Q&A, and they will be providing some answers to questions in real time as we can. We've got a beginning of our session today. We're going to hear from Achieving the Dream's President and CEO, Karen Stout, and then we've got a short presentation by the two lead authors of the Aspen Institute and CCRC's recent report, the Dual Enrollment Playbook. After that, we're going to transition to a panel discussion with leaders from 4 institutions who are doing tremendous work around increasing equity in dual enrollment. We're going to hear from Dr. Marcia Ballinger, President of Lorain Community College, President Ava Parker of Palm Beach State College, Dr. Kathleen Plinsky, who is Provost of Valencia College, and Dr. David Thomas, who for at least 2 more weeks is Associate Vice President at Community College of Philadelphia before his next promotion. And I'm not going to say anything more than that other than to turn this over now to my president, Dr. Karen Stout.
Well, thank you, Nick, and welcome everyone, and thank you. Thank you for taking time at a time when, honestly, we're all struggling a little bit to renew and prepare for a new term or a new semester, potentially with limited reserves, but with an unwavering passion to do whatever we can to break down barriers for our students to access learning and learning that leads to equitable outcomes. We're also struggling with focus. At least I am. I'm struck by the extraordinary events of the last 10 days as we bore witness to a violent assault on the Capitol by people who sought to foment, who sought to undermine a democratic election, an assault fomented by those who have sworn to uphold and defend our Constitution. And we bore witness to, and I'm going to borrow from writer Roxane Gay, we bore witness to white supremacy unchecked. Now, why is that important for today's conversation? Number one, I thought that as a national leader of a national organization that has equity at the heart of what we do, it was an appropriate statement to make. But number two, community colleges since our inception have played a critical role, a critical democratizing role in our communities. And that role has never been more important, making it urgent, absolutely urgent, that we lead with equity in the design of our dual enrollment programs. Until COVID, this was the largest growing demographic of students within our community college sector. It probably still is even in COVID. But this is the program. This is a program with the promise, depending on its design, to drive social, economic, and civic opportunity for Black, Latinx, and Indigenous students in communities across our country. It's time for our colleges to embrace a bold new access agenda. I said that at DREAM last year, pre-COVID, as I looked at the stagnant educational attainment rates in many of our communities. And I was thinking about the urgent work of our colleges. I say it now and today with even more urgency. You know the numbers. Community college enrollments are down 10% as a sector from fall to fall. We have a significant decline in new students, and among that new student decline, we have large declines in those coming to us right out of high school, possibly many of the dual enrolled students who lost continuity between June and September. We held on in a stronger way to current students, and that's because of your heroic efforts. Your heroic efforts combined with CARES dollars that we creatively deployed rapidly to our students, and with amazing high-touch techniques to reach students, where colleges across the country deployed workers, not just advisors and student affairs professionals, but everyone on their campuses to support student success and learning continuity. But still, we have a large number of disconnected youth and adults in our communities ravaged by the pandemic. So the Bold New Access agenda requires us to connect in new ways to disconnected youth and disconnected adults with new on-ramps, and I would say with strengthened design of our dual enrollment programs. We have a lost generation of students in our communities, and dual enrollment offers an opportunity to build a pipeline of talent that will strengthen our communities economically and civically. Dual enrollment programs play a vitalizing and catalyzing role for young people to reimagine their post-secondary potential, and community colleges are crucial partners in building potential student capacity for post-secondary education well before they near the end of their secondary educational career. So we're excited that this past fall, our friends from the Aspen Institute and CCRC released the Dual Enrollment Playbook, a guide to equitable acceleration for students. And we've been looking forward to this playbook since DREAM last year. In February, you might remember a panel where John Fink and Elizabeth Barnett from CCRC started to describe the project and kind of point to some of what the findings are. So this report is a welcome addition to the field and to our work for many reasons. The report is organized around 5 principles that are very much aligned with achieving the DREAM's priorities, mission and priorities for dual enrollment. And to me, it was little surprise to see that 7 of the 9 colleges profiled in the report are part of the Achieving the Dream network. The content of the playbook is a compilation of exemplary practices. And during the panel today, you're going to hear directly from leaders of 3 colleges whose innovative practices are reducing the equity gaps for Black, Indigenous, and Latinx students. And our panel also features a representative from Community College of Philadelphia, a longtime member of our Gateway to College network. So we're pleased to have the Gateway to College network also represented on the panel. We know that dual enrollment partnerships are essential to our local enrollment strategies, and many colleges are eager to increase participation in dual enrollment and matriculation into post-secondary pathways. But unfortunately, many of our programs are designed with an ad hoc way with little strategy, or they operate outside of the college's strategic plans, and they're not necessarily connected to their student success plans. And when dual enrollment programs fail to connect students to locally relevant career pathways, I have a cat in the room, so I'm like you, dealing with disruption and trying to be agile with it. We try to connect these programs to locally relevant career pathways, but when we don't do that, we underachieve in the promise of these programs. Data continues to indicate that access to dual enrollment programs is skewed toward privileged students, continuing to shut off access to Black, Indigenous, Latinx, low income, and first generation students. And when these programs are not implemented thoughtfully and with an equity lens, it stretches rather than reduces the existing equity gap, perpetuating the inequitable outcomes and structures and systems that these same programs are intended to dismantle. The Playbook's principles offer you a design roadmap for your dual enrollment programs. Achieving your objectives will primarily require strong, unwavering leadership from the K through 12 and community college leaders that are partnering on these programs, a clear agenda, and mutually beneficial goals. Goals that will not just benefit the K through 12 partner or the community college partner, but goals that will shape the future contours of the community that the partners serve. Imagine part of that contour, including the mutually beneficial goal of building a more equitable, anti-racist community. Nick, I turn it off to you. I think I turned it off to Nick.
You were right, Karen. Sorry, I was my mute button was hidden from me, but I appreciate that. Thank you for your comments. And I'm going to straight away turn this right over to our colleague from CCRC, John Fink, and we will get back to our presentation.
Thanks, Nick. Can you get those slides up? Oh, great. Hey, everyone. I'm John Fink. I'm with the Community College Research Center, partnered with the Aspen Institute on this project we're excited to tell you about. And thanks to ATD for hosting this webinar. I'm just going to take a step back for a moment and kind of ground us in some data and this motivation for the study. First is that when you think about this from the sort of high school perspective, dual enrollment, which takes its form in many shapes and sizes, concurrent enrollment, dual credit, CTE, at the high school, at the college, we sort of use dual enrollment as an umbrella term, but for any sort of opportunity for a high schooler to earn college credit through a partnering college, dual enrollment is just sort of one piece of that early college landscape. AP, or advanced placement, is the other really large and fast growing component here, but also early college high schools, IB. In particular, early college high schools have really strong effects. Evidence shows, experimental evidence, especially for minoritized students, low income students. So it's important to sort of situate this broadly, but dual enrollment is really of particular importance to community colleges, as I'll show. These are some recent data points just on the size of these populations. If you click again, we're sort of trying to estimate based on the trend line. We think that, more recently, we're sort of pushing up against 2 million high school students, or up to 2 million high school students participating in dual enrollment nationally. And on the next slide, you'll see how that growth has really sort of been concentrated in the community college sector, which the legend got cut off here. But looking at the trend, that dark blue is the community colleges, which have really shown a lot of growth, where at the same time, adult enrollment has declined since 2011 or so. And so what you see at a lot of community colleges, larger and larger shares are high school dual enrollment students. So it's a very important population. In general, I think this is a net positive, not just to institutions, but to students and communities, as a lot of evidence has shown that participating in dual enrollment has a range of benefits, both in high school and in college. The challenge, as the next slide shows, is really just about equity and access and who's benefiting from these programs. So this is data from the US Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. It did a census of all public schools, and we just released an analysis yesterday on this. I'll share the link, but one of the top level findings nationally is just that Black and Latinx students in particular are underrepresented in dual enrollment courses. We also sort of compare to AP, that's made more progress in equalizing access to AP coursework, although it's really important to caveat that there's a big difference between taking an AP course, taking the test, and receiving a qualifying score on the test, and there's some equity issues there. But when you look at dual enrollment, there really are issues in terms of equitable access. The other thing on the next slide that we've sort of shown is just mapping which school districts are really taking advantage of these dual enrollment programs. And you see this sort of like widespread blanket across the country in terms of participation in dual enrollment, which is a contrast to the next slide that shows AP participation. And you can really just see as you flip to the next slide, just geographically how these two programs are really serving different parts of the country. Just geographically, it's pretty striking to see how the sort of difference between widespread across the country to the more urban and coastal areas for AP. So in the next slide, the other thing that we looked at as a part of this research is just for every school district, to what extent are we seeing racial equity gaps, differences in participation rates between white and Black students, or white and Hispanic or Latinx students. And what we find is that in the vast majority of districts, there's a racial equity gap. There's work to be done to equalize access to these opportunities. And these are shown in these maps here that sort of show, green areas with smaller gaps, purple areas with larger gaps. But I think one big takeaway from this research is that there's a lot of variation. And if you click again, you'll see that we do observe about 1 in 5 districts across the country that have sort of closed or have no racial equity gap in access to dual enrollment. I did this analysis before with 2015-16 school year. And when we looked at the 2017-18 school year, although we saw more students taking dual enrollment courses, I think we saw widening of gaps and slightly fewer. It's almost closer to 1 in 6 districts now have no or closed gaps. So it's not really moving in the right direction nationally, although there's really encouraging practice at the local level, like we'll hear about from our panelists, where places are making a difference. And we wrote a lengthier paper, decomposing all this variation and gaps. And one of the big takeaways from that is, even within states where there's a similar policy context, within districts, among even high schools, what happens at the local level really matters in terms of advancing equity. And I think that we'll learn more about that. So that really motivated the study in the next slide, which is, given all this variation that we're seeing, what can we learn from places that have stronger results, specifically for increasing access and success in dual enrollment for students of color?
Thanks, John. Chelsea Mell here from the Aspen Institute College Excellence Program. I'm going to take over for a few minutes to share the Playbook findings with you all. And on the next slide, just to ground you in how we came to create the Playbook. This was, as mentioned, a collaboration between Aspen's K-12 higher ed programs, as well as the Community College Research Center, also in partnership with 3 state agencies in Florida, Ohio, and Washington, and our generous funders of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we started with data analysis in all 3 of these states, trying to identify partnerships of high schools and community colleges where there was high participation rates for students of color, as well as strong outcomes for those students in terms of their course completion rates, their continuation onto college, and a few other factors. From there, we spoke with all of the partnerships that rose to the top of the data to identify if there was intentionality in how they were approaching their programs, and to ensure they wanted us to come visit. And from there, we narrowed it down to 9 sites across the 3 states to conduct field research, ultimately conducting a couple of those virtually due to the pandemic, but still gathering lots of great information from the field. And so using those visits, we created the dual enrollment playbook, which on the next slide, you will see the 5-part framework that Karen alluded to outlined here. And I'm just gonna spend about a couple minutes giving you the very condensed overview of what those 5 principles are and what's in them. And then our panel will share some real live examples of how they've applied these in their work. So first, setting a shared vision and goals that prioritize equity. This will connect directly to our leadership panel coming up. This is really about the equity-focused leadership and strategy. So within that, having a broader vision for dual enrollment, and connecting, having commitments to equity and strategies where equity is at the heart. Building arrangements with partners that take into mind incentives and potential policy constraints, and developing an equity-minded culture to support this work on campus. The second principle is focused on expanding access. So building early awareness as early as elementary school with students, having strong outreach and thoughtful outreach to communities of color about the options, recruiting students actively and strategically for these programs, and reducing barriers. So that might include placement testing, any fees borne by students, and transportation to campus. The third principle is focused on providing the advising and supports necessary to ensure equitable outcomes. So first, having strong academic advising that connects students to smart choices about college and careers beyond high school. Coordinating advising across the partnership, so whether at the high school or the college, students are getting the information they need, and proactively supporting any students that need some extra help. And then principle 4 focused on providing high quality instruction. So this starts with aligning high school and college curricula, so students are ready for these courses by the time they're in high school, acclimating students to college expectations, so they're going to be successful, and building their confidence through excellent instruction, and supporting those instructors with the resources they need to teach these courses. And then finally, principle 5, focused on building strong partnerships by organizing teams and developing relationships. So first, having a dual enrollment team that's focused on equity at the college, building relationships across all levels of the partnership. So from executives to counselors to faculty to dual enrollment directors. And then finally, assessing outcomes and enacting improvements. So I know that was the SparkNotes version maybe of the playbook. Encourage you to read the entire thing, and I'm sure our panelists will color in a lot of those principles with some of their experiences. Very briefly on the next slide, I also want to mention that in addition to the playbook itself, we've developed 4 other tools. So there's first a 4-page summary document that highlights at a very high level the principles I just talked through. Then a guide to getting started, which is a sequence of action steps that you can take to pull folks into meetings, some questions to get started to answering in those meetings, and some data templates to use to get started assessing your own data. And then the final 2 are self-assessment tools, one for the college, one for the high schools, which is in a way another way to read through the playbook findings, but also can be used as a tool to assess your practice against the ones we have identified in the research. So with that, thank you for letting us join and share. I'm going to turn it back to Nick for our wonderful panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, and thank you, John. We certainly appreciate you setting up the context for us, explaining the research and the project that you've done, and setting the stage for our panel discussion. And as Chelsea indicated, we've now got time set aside to hear from the leaders of the colleges that are doing this work, who are providing the examples and the insights that led to Chelsea and John's report, and hopefully that will lead to a broader scaling of some really exciting practices across the country. So I'm going to jump right in. You see our 4 panelists on the screen, but I'm going to turn off the slide deck right now so that we can just have as close to a face-to-face as you might imagine with these 4 leaders. So I'm going to begin, President Parker, with you. In the playbook, you were quoted as referring to a concerted effort to convince students of color that dual enrollment is for them. So can you tell us about the culturally specific supports that you implement, either in outreach or in programming, that helps those students to understand that dual enrollment is for them?
Yes, thanks so much. Nick, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the panel, and certainly appreciate the great work that ATD and Aspen and CCRC are doing in this area. What I would say to you as I start my comments, is just that we all should be concerned about diversifying dual enrollment. And the reason that we all should be concerned about that is because we all know that, if we get students to have credits, when they're still in high school, before they leave high school, and if we can introduce them to the great work that we do at our colleges, it is more likely that they're going to retain and complete. So we have, not just because it's the right thing to do for our students, it's also the right thing to do for our institution because it's a greater way for us to recruit more students. And when you think about students of color and think about them in dual enrollment, keep in mind that so many of our students are the first person in their families to go to college. And so they really have no idea about dual enrollment or about college generally. So it becomes a question of how is it that you introduce dual enrollment to this target audience? And so our thoughts are that you just can't rely upon counselors at the high school because they have so many other things to do. You can't just assume that they're going to get it through kind of general osmosis. I think you have to actually go out and try to reach these students and do things like going to churches, going to places where you traditionally would find people of color so that they can in turn share the information with folks within their community. I think about community organizations that are traditionally led or that traditionally engage people of color. We talk to them and make sure that they are aware that we have this available so they can in turn share it with the folks within their community. Boys and girls clubs are like great options. So you can't, because they tend to help a lot of economically disadvantaged students or students of color. So that's another place that we turn to, as well as something that I bet you guys, really, that I really encourage you to think about is I want you to work with your elected officials because within your communities, which one of your elected officials represent communities that are either a higher population of kids who are of minority descent, or maybe those who are economically disadvantaged. And it is safe for you to assume that in those different districts that they're probably not aware of dual enrollment. And so I encourage you to work with that elected official, work with that office to show them how you can improve attainment within their community. And that's another non-traditional way to reach these students. I'd also say for you to pay attention to who your outreach person is at your particular institution. That is that a lot of times folks relate to people who appear to have walked in their shoes or who actually have. And so this is an area where I encourage you to definitely look at hiring a diverse population to help you to recruit your students. And then two final things, and Nick, help me on the time because I'll get carried away on this topic. But two final things I say to you is that, one thing that we do is that we target specific schools. So not all high schools are treated the same. That is that, when we have high schools that have greater populations of minority students, we try to specifically reach out to them and show them that we have this option available to them because, again, we're assuming that they probably, would not have access or awareness. So we have high populations of folks from different countries within our service area. And so I recently met with a group of Haitian leaders within our community, and it was amazing the fact that they weren't aware of the availability of this option for the students within their communities. So again, it's like, how do you touch those groups? And you can even look at what your population currently looks like, see what you're missing, and then really know that those are the groups that you want to go after. And then finally, what I'd say to you is that I think you should really expand the offerings. So it's not, while most of our students are here and they're looking to earn credentials for an AA, and we have some programs where we have a welding program where it's also available for dual enrollment. And so it's not about channeling students to a particular area as much as it is about expanding our offerings, hoping to appeal to a greater audience.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to jump over to Dr. Plinsky from Valencia. Dr. Plinsky, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your efforts at collaborating with Osceola School District and how you assess the impact of having a community-wide strategic goal.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Nick, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in this wonderful panel. I would say that our community-wide goal has really served as a foundation and a bedrock for our collaboration with the school districts. If you look back about 10 years ago, we recognized that Osceola County had historically one of the lowest college going rates in the state of Florida. And Osceola County is a majority Hispanic community. And for many years, we were ranked somewhere around 60 or 61st in the state out of 67 counties in terms of the percentage of high school graduates that were continuing on to college. And it was, I think, really important for Valencia to jointly establish with the school district of Osceola County, as well as the Education Foundation of Osceola County, this vision and aspiration for what we could create in terms of increased access for students to participate in post-secondary education. And through that joint goal, we were able to increase our county's college going rate by more than 15 percentage points in less than a decade. And I think that one of the things that was really key to that effort was emphasizing that our goal together was not about increasing Valencia's enrollment. And that's oftentimes where I think the assumption was made, oh, this is self-serving, this is all about increasing your enrollment. I couldn't say enough times that no. The goal was not to increase the Valencia going rate. The goal was to increase the college going rate, recognizing that for many students that meant coming to Valencia, but if Valencia wasn't the right choice, that still was a win, because our goal was this joint aspirational goal for encouraging students to pursue post-secondary education. We certainly saw dual enrollment as a key strategy and a key element to that joint goal. And I think one of the really important elements of the way that we looked at that goal was sometimes when you have a really large district and a really large percentage point differential, you kind of get lost in terms of what does that actually mean? And I think a key turning point for us is when we translated sort of that college going rate number, that percentage, into actual numbers of students. And so when we started to see that, this meant if we could get 30 more students per high school to enroll in college, that would lift the college going rate to match the state average. Suddenly that felt much more attainable and much more personalized. You could start to envision conversations with 30 students per high school to encourage them to pursue post-secondary education. And this has become such an important part of our work that our Board of Trustees in December actually approved our college's strategic impact plan for the future. And we actually have in the college's strategic impact plan a college access goal, which explicitly states that our goal for the college going rate for the 2 counties in our service district to reach 80%. And we're explicit about reaching 80% for students of each race and ethnicity. So that's just been, I think, a really important cultural shift for us to be willing to accept an aspirational goal that's sort of beyond the boundaries of our particular silo, if you will. It's beyond our institutional silo, but it's really an ecosystem goal. And that just, I think, sets the stage for collaboration and really meaningful work for the community.
Thank you so much. And that question of a community-wide goal and thinking about the broader ecosystem leads me to wonder a little bit about kind of all of the factors that are really at play here. And President Ballinger, I wonder if you could speak for a moment about how the workforce needs in your community inform the efforts to increase equity in dual enrollment programming at Lorain County College.
Sure. And Nick, thank you so much for the opportunity. And it's just absolutely a delightful opportunity to be on this panel with such well-respected colleagues and friends. Just as Kathleen was describing in her community in Florida, the importance of having that goal and what does it mean. So as we've looked at Lorain County, and so we're a county that is very bifurcated. We're heavy industry, but we're also agricultural. And our 2 largest urban core communities of Elyria and Lorain, which historically have been very underrepresented in terms of higher education, and have had individuals who have been in the manufacturing sector and many who have been underemployed. And so looking at that entire ecosystem of what does it truly mean to, as our friends at CCRC like to say all the time, design with the end in mind. And so as we looked at the socioeconomics within our community, we know that only 4.7% of those individuals who are born into the lowest socioeconomic quintile ever rise to the top during his or her lifetime. And as we started to to do that deeper dive from a workforce development perspective and creating those greater equitable outcomes, and where are not only the jobs today, but how are we growing the talent for where we see the community going overall. So our dual enrollment program is an integral component of the entire workforce development program, not only of the college and not only of the county, but our entire region, because we recognize and understand that it is a regional focus. Over the past decade, 10 years ago, we had 23% of our graduating seniors from high schools had some college credit with us. And, we were really proud of that fact, but we weren't disaggregating our data and truly understanding then who was continuing on in college, and then what types of jobs, and how were we being very intentional about designing those career, technical, and other job opportunities with employers as part of that pathway. And so that design work has brought employers to the table, along with Lorain County Community College as well. We have 14 universities that deliver bachelor's and master's degrees on our campus as part of our university partnership. So we have truly put together an ecosystem that spans from K-12 all the way through universities, so that students have that access to every opportunity. And in particular, we have designed programs, many of which are learn and earn models. Many of the programs that we're offering with dual enrollment have industry credentials embedded with them. We look at, we're a part of an economic development entity in Northeast Ohio, Team NEO. And so misaligned opportunities from an equity perspective is a major component of that, so that we can very proactively work, again, back with the school districts through dual enrollment to build that talent supply in areas that we know are high paying, in demand jobs. I'm really excited about the fact that we, as of this past May's graduating classes, we had doubled. Over 43% of students were graduating with at least 18 credit hours from Lorain County Community College, and 25% of the students are Black and Latinx students, and that compares to a 10% statewide. So it really is the entire ecosystem, and designing it with what equity outcomes we embrace.
Thanks so much. And I wonder if we could go back for a moment, because I think that there is something in what you said that was a question that I wanted to ask Dr. Flinsky about whether or not there is any trade-off when we're prioritizing equity and dual enrollment. Are there any business trade-offs in terms of enrollment or the the kind of the interest of the college, and how does that play out?
So, in terms of trade-off, our mission is to change lives, and it truly is about recognizing and understanding what is our core mission, and truly that changing socioeconomics within our community for the wealth of individuals, and so that employers have that educated workforce. So we've leaned in very, very hard to that. Just as Kathleen was describing the new strategic plan that Valencia adopted back in December, our board adopted a new one a year and a half ago, very outcome driven, and it's 10,000 degrees of impact. And what that meant is that by 2025, we're graduating 10,000 more. And then further, that has gone down to the community level. So the mayor of Elyria, who's first gen student who graduated from Lorain County Community College, he ran on a platform to, in fact, change the economics of that community by then creating their own goal within Elyria. And so just a week ago, Elyria City Council and the mayor announced a Skill City Elyria. And so the trade-offs really are, I don't view them as trade-offs as much as I view them as leaning hard to what is the right thing to do based on our mission.
Thanks so much. And Dr. Plinsky, do you want to speak to how that's looking in Central Florida?
Certainly, and I'll echo so much of what President Ballinger said, that really, we don't look at it as a trade-off either. It's really a return on mission. And I think being really clear about what you value, and I do think that, our teams, our staff are so thoughtful about being such good stewards of our resources. And I think if you don't understand, again, that sort of bigger goal, the bigger why, the compelling why, it would be natural to say, you know what, we're going to have to constrain dual enrollment because on a purely financial business sense, it might not make sense. If you're not getting full funding for a dual enrollment student, or you're not getting funding for a dual enrollment student over the summer, without understanding that bigger compelling why, you could understandably assume this is something that we would want to make sure that we constrain, that you sort of treat it in sort of a scarcity mindset. So I think it's really important for our leadership to be very explicit in that compelling why. And also something that President Parker alluded to earlier, we found that we had to be very intentional and explicit about saying it's okay to differentiate outreach to particular high schools based on what those particular high schools need. What we found was sort of this long held belief that oftentimes doesn't rise to the surface, that, oh, if we do something for one high school, we have to do it for every high school. And so that kind of, I think, sometimes held back some of our efforts early on. But now that we've been able to be very explicit and about our intention to increase equity and dual enrollment, and we have given our teams access to the data that they need to understand the unique needs that our different high schools and our different students may have, that allows us then to identify what might be that differentiated outreach that makes sense for one school that wouldn't be needed for another. So just as an example, we had a high school that we were working very closely with to increase participation in dual enrollment. And some of the data that we look at on our dashboard on a regular basis is both race, ethnicity, historical participation in dual enrollment, but also historical college going rates. And so for a high school that had relatively low college going rates over time, a very large Hispanic and Black population, this was a high school that we really wanted to see increases in dual enrollment participation. We were able to see that there were actually quite a few students that were applying to participate and who met the eligibility requirements, but we weren't seeing that translate into actual students enrolling in dual enrollment. What we learned through that relationship, and again, the key here, I think, is that strong relationship with the school districts so that you can have these really, I think, intentional conversations with school leaders. What we learned is that one of the elements that was preventing students from participating in dual enrollment was that many students didn't have access to transportation to come to campus. And so we were able to partner with that particular high school to provide bus transportation for those students, saw participation dramatically rise, and then partnered with both of our school districts to say, okay, for what other high schools would that make sense? Where could we have a tremendous impact by providing bus transportation for those students? So again, we don't really see it as a business trade-off, but rather that what will yield the largest return on mission. Thanks.
And President Parker, I wonder if we could go back. We did learn in the playbook that you deploy campus provosts to local high schools. And I wonder if you could just very briefly tell us about what impacts you have seen from that action.
Yes, thanks so much for asking about that, Nick. We found that is a very effective way to make sure that it gets done. So, and I'm in the goals that I provide for campus provosts, I'm pretty specific. It is that, you have a responsibility to go out and to build these relationships with these high school leaders. Because what I found is that high school principals, they want to talk to, someone who they think is at their same level. And so therefore they tend to want to meet with a campus leader. And so that's part of it. And the other part of it is that often when we develop these relationships, we develop it with the entire leadership team that we have on our campus. And then we go actually and develop the conversations with the high schools. What's interesting is that we specifically say, when you look in your region, again, for those diverse high schools, it's really important you do a couple of things. One is that you go and definitely build a relationship. Two, get those high school leaders on our campus, because a lot of times we're assuming that they have been on recently and they haven't been, but getting them on and letting them see the work that we're doing, I think it kind of opens their eyes up to all these wonderful opportunities. And then you can collaborate on the issues that are really impacting the success of their students coming and participating in dual enrollment, which often is whether or not they have transportation, and also, how is it that we can give the balance of that high school teacher that can be to class on their campus, but also give that student exposure, to the college. So I would say that me holding the campus leader responsible has led to great results, because it's something I evaluate them on at the end of the year.
Thanks so much. Now, Dr. Thomas, we've heard a lot about work in the community and providing access to students, but I also want to make sure that we are addressing the question of what kind of support we provide to students on campus. Gateway to College is a program designed specifically for students who previously dropped out of high school, and you've hosted this program on your campus for more than 10 years. I wonder if you could talk to us for a moment about how hosting that program has informed CCP's approach to equity in dual enrollment.
Certainly. It's been a pleasure to host Gateway. Of course, I know we probably have some Gateway family in the chat, so shout out to the Gateway folks here in this call. It has informed the work at Community College of Philadelphia, specifically with regards to equity, not so much as it relates to access, but much more so as it relates to success of students. I say that because our dual enrollment population of student on our campus, Gateway to College being a segment of that population, very much in terms of demographics mirrors our general student population. There are still some differences primarily related to socioeconomic status. However, in terms of race, gender, and ethnicity, it pretty much mirrors our general student population in terms of access. However, what we do find is that when we look at our data in terms of outcomes and student success, students in our dual enrollment programs from those same demographics, those same race and ethnicity populations that we find in our general student population, those students in dual enrollment tend to outperform those students in our general student population. So what it has forced our faculty and our staff and our administration to do is to really look at the data and say, what's the variable there and how can it potentially be replicated to increase outcomes for the general student population? Nick, you've been on our campus, you know how our Gateway to College program is set up. It is not a program that is tucked away in a corner somewhere where the students go in, they take all their classes with 2 or 3 high school instructors who can currently provide credit to college. Our students are enrolled in the general student population. So our dual enrollment students and our Gateway to College students, particularly 90% of their courses are in the colleges with the college faculty. They're mainstream with traditional students. So our faculty know that they're there and they see that these students are still in high school, but also get this full set of wraparound supports and this high touch connection from the Gateway to College team that allows those students to be successful. And it's gotten a lot of us at the administrative level over the years scratching our heads and saying, what is the magic pill that's getting these students to be successful, right? And very often they don't know that these students have been disconnected from high school, sometimes not just for a semester or for a year, but for sometimes 2 or 3 years, right? And then when you begin to dig down and really see their stories and you realize that many of these students have been in foster care in 6 or 7 homes over the last time they've been adjudicated, they've got all of these barriers that impact them. Nonetheless, very often they are successful taking college classes to earn their high school credential. And again, for us, it's been really being able to show our faculty, our administration, my colleagues at the college, high touch, right? Ultra love, this atmosphere where we're making sure that these students have all of the resources, all of the supports, and all of the connections to be successful. And again, those promising practices that we've done with our dual enrollment students, particularly our Gateway to College students, have now begun to inform how we support all of our students on campus. So I think that's really critical for us to look at what works for these students and how we can, again, scale it up so that those things that work for those students work for all students and vice versa. The things that work for the traditional students really well, how can we also replicate them to work and support dual enrollment students and Gateway to College students?
I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. And by the way, I mean, we acknowledged at the beginning of the session that Aspen and CCRC didn't actually visit CCP for this playbook, but when I've been to your campus and I look at the 5 principles that are in this playbook around setting a shared vision that prioritizes equity, expanding access, connecting students to advising and supports, these are all 5 in place at CCP in a really clear way. And I wonder if you could just say, because I know this has been part of your work over the past decade to ensure that, which of those principles maybe has been required the most creativity or innovation in order to get there?
That's a loaded question, Nick. What I will say is, in general, any strategy that requires to get adults to coalesce around one thing is always going to require the most innovation. However, what I will say related to those principles is, for us, it's been probably principle 4, and that is ensuring high quality instruction to support students' competence and confidence in dual enrollment programs. At the core of teaching and learning are teachers and learners, right? But when we think about that sweet spot for dual enrollment students who are still in high school but also taking college courses, you're dealing with 2 types of instructors or 2 types of teachers. You're dealing with the K-12 instructor, who very often are specialists in pedagogy, and you're dealing with content knowledge instructors very often on the college side or the post-secondary side. I happen to have my foot in both worlds. I was a former high school teacher and a principal. Now I'm in the higher ed space. So I think I was uniquely kind of like positioned to help kind of bridge some of those gaps, but really getting faculty on both sides of the aisle together to talk about promising practices, to really see that there's 6 degrees of separation in terms of, I think, their goal, their outcomes, and their expectations for students, but then realizing that they can really enhance one another's craft and art as they're looking to move students ahead. So we've done lots of things in terms of getting faculty to faculty exchanges and having our faculty shadow and watch other faculty in the high school side and so forth and so on. Also being able to drill down, then look at student data and figure out how we were able to move students from point A to point B in both the high school side and the college side. And then the last piece I'll say around that has been our work in terms of really looking at multiple measures of assessment to determine a student's readiness, right? So on the high school side, you've got a slew of assessments. Very often you'll hear K-12 teachers say we're assessing students out of the wazoo. But my argument is, if you don't necessarily think that they're very valuable on the K-12 side, how can we on the community college side utilize some of that data? We're looking at state assessments and seeing if they are at all aligned to AccuPlacer. And if so, why do we test students twice? Do we necessarily need to do that? How do we look at the student holistically? His and her high school graduation credits and all of those things in terms of the transcript to really impact placement and move students forward. So yeah, for us, that's probably required the most creativity.
Thanks so much. Well, I really have appreciated everyone's ability to pack a lot of really great content into a short amount of time. We do have a few minutes, and I wonder, Chelsea or Stephanie, are there any questions from the chat that you want to elevate that we might pose to one or more of our panelists?
Hi, Nick. There are a couple really great questions. We've been having fun in the question section. Let's see. Devin Fort had a really thorough conversation. I think we actually heard some of this, but how do you envision, and maybe Dave, you can speak more to this, how do you get college guidance counselors at the high school level? How do you get the messaging out? What have been some of the strategies that you've found to be the most successful in bridging down to those K-12 partners? And then there's another question around funding. That's the other theme that we've heard, like, how do you make the dollars work at the college? And what are some of the ways that you've been able to engage your K-12 partners in those funding conversations, or at the policy level? John, what are you seeing there around funding? So those are sort of the 2 questions that would be great if we could close on.
And I would encourage folks, if you just want to take a 30 to 60 second swipe at either of those, I'll just open the floor to whoever feels like you've got the best view of it.
Sure, I'm going to jump in because I just unmuted myself. But what I want to do is say, I want to borrow something that I think President Parker said, and that is, and this may be different in different districts. However, for Philadelphia, the principal at the high school is the gatekeeper of so many things, right? And if you can get the principal to see the value in what's happening at your institution and see that you have their students' best interests at heart and you providing this phenomenal opportunity, typically it filters down, right? So the principal buys in, they set the tone in the school, they can get the guidance counselors or the school counselors and the teachers on board, parents on board. Parents always want a great opportunity for their child, right? But again, for us, it has been working specifically with the principal. Our superintendent is already on board. I think he's kind of allowed the edict to go down, but very often it gets lost before it gets to principals. Principals typically are the best way for us.
I'll chime in here and share 3 strategies that have worked extremely well for us over the past couple of decades. One thing that we do for each high school, and so the principals love this, the curriculum directors love this, and the faculty do, we provide them with their own data set of the students who then come to Lorain County Community College so that they recognize and understand where there are strengths, where there are opportunities for improvement. So it's a huge lens for them for development. On the parent side, to your point, Dr. Thomas, we provide to all parents from every school district what the dollar savings have been for their students who have enrolled in our dual enrollment program. And then we provide overall to the school district so that they can use as part of their levy campaigns for school taxes, for example, that their school district saved $8 million for the class of 2020. So that's really important. And the third strategy has been truly getting the buy-in of the teachers. And so that we contract for $0 back with the school district for their teachers who are credentialed and meet our criteria to teach the classes at the high school so that students don't leave the high school environment. Some of them do come to our campus or learning centers, but some of them like to stay there. So the teachers become Lorain County Community College instructors as well as the high school instructors.
I'll add to that. We also have really had success with joint positions. So we have what we call Valencia transition coaches that Valencia helps to fund, but they're actually school district employees. And they have access to our systems and all they know the inside baseball, if you will, of all of the enrollment steps and helping really serve as a concierge to our students in working through the different enrollment processes. We've also employed what we're calling extension faculty. And this addresses, I saw some of the questions as well about how do we help ensure that our students meet the eligibility requirements for dual enrollment. So we have a number of math faculty that have a shared teaching load. So they teach math for college readiness in the high schools, but they also have a teaching load at Valencia. So they're teaching our gateway math class in addition to teaching math in the high school, which has really helped with some of our curricular alignment efforts, because it's as if we have someone on the inside in both institutions who are able to serve as a translator sometimes between our different terminologies. But those shared positions have been particularly helpful for us.
You know, one thing that doesn't quite respond, Nick, but it's something that that actually has come to me that I think would be very effective is that as we try to find ways to introduce, what we do as early as we can, often what tends to be an issue is the testing. That is that they're not able to pass the test that actually gets these students into dual enrollment. So something that's come to me, even just during this conversation, is that I think that it's about, how is it that we can start those students just taking the test in middle school? That is that they have an opportunity to become familiar with the material. You can start dual enrollment in Florida as early as 6th grade. So how is it that, when it's a 6th and 7th grader, that I can partner with that middle school and actually have them to start to take the test, so that they're comfortable with it, so that as they get to 8th and 9th grade, it tends to be that they're ready really to go ahead and participate in dual enrollment. So what I'd say to you is that it's the innovative ideas that kind of talk about how is it that you can really make this exciting to me for the high school or for the middle school to partner with you to advance this idea that's going to make the difference.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that your acknowledgement that, in many states, there are some, some important restrictions around, who can access this. Maybe it's based on testing, maybe it's based on GPA, and we want to be able to address those. We're going to be continuing this conversation at the DREAM conference in February, and we hope that those of you who are joining us today will be able to join us again at DREAM February 16th to the 19th. There will be discussions about equity and dual enrollment there. And we want to stop now for a moment just to thank all of our panelists and our presenters today. I hope you will join me in giving them a virtual round of applause. I know that many of you didn't get all of your questions answered, and we don't have any more time with them today, but we will follow up with you in the coming weeks if we've got specific answers to questions that you've posed. We will be making the recording of today's webinar available to everyone who registered, and we will also share the slides. So if anyone has got questions for us, you're welcome to get a hold of us at, and advance my slides. Please send us an email message at gatewaytocollege@achievingthedream.org. You can come visit us at achievingthedream.org to see the registration for the DREAM conference. And once again, thanks so much for spending your Friday afternoon with us. And thank you so much to President Parker, President Ballinger, Dr. Plinsky, and Dr. Thomas, as well as John and Chelsea. Hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your afternoon and a great 3-day weekend celebrating the legacy of Dr. King.
Thank you.
Thank you.